Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Shay Ali here with you on Inspired Online. And this afternoon, we go all the way back out to Sydney, Australia, as if you couldn't tell by the lovely background, with the wonderful Dr. David Paul. Now, David was with us a couple of weeks ago and gave us this really fascinating Inspired Online, all behind the scientific basis of the law of attraction and concepts like that. If you remember, David is an expert in change management. He's got a PhD in complex change management and has dealt with projects all over the world, such as, the Beijing Olympics. He's advised Australian government. He's trained thousands of MBA students around the world, and we were having such a fascinating conversation that I thought, well, we're going to have him back to unpick some other big concepts for us. So welcome back. Thank you for coming on again for a little bit of a part two. And I'll ask you the same question that I asked you before, which is, if you had to share your wisdom with the world in a nutshell, well, let's change the question a little bit. What wisdom would you like to share today?
I would like to share, after perhaps all the restrictions are lifted, is for every single human being to practice the 5 key elements of emotional intelligence, just so that we link better, we forge deeper relationships, we get on with each other better, and most importantly, we have a better quality of life. So that would be my kind of wish, that everybody would practice these 5 elements.
And well, that begs the question, what are the 5 elements?
Yes, good question. So each one is quite deep, but let me go through the 5 very quickly. Mm-hmm. The very first one is the ability to be self-aware. So to go deep down inside and say, wow, what is causing me to feel this way? Or why am I losing control in this situation? Or what is causing me to be upset? Because normally I wouldn't be this upset. So that level of self-awareness about what the body, mind, spirit, and heart are doing. Because oftentimes, how often have we said, I'd wish I hadn't said that?
Yeah.
In the moment. Or I wish I hadn't written that email at the time.
Done that.
So, all those regrets are a lack of self-awareness. So that's number 1. Number 2 is what's called self-regulation. So self-regulation is the ability to regulate your emotions as well as the emotions of others. So that's pretty powerful. Yeah. So it's about being so aware that you can say, guess what? What you're saying to me right now is making me, I can feel it coming, anger. Or you can feel a sense of frustration seeping in, or wow, you make me feel so good just by being with you. How can we take it to an even higher level? So self-regulation is the ability to regulate your own emotions, as well as realizing, oh my gosh, I'm causing somebody else to get upset. So regulating their emotions as well. So self-regulation is key. The third one is what's called intrinsic motivation. So it's all to do with, when you feel like giving up, when you feel like don't want to get up in the morning, when you don't feel like doing that task. It's the ability to go deep down and go, I can do this. Yeah. And that takes a bit of training. The fourth one is empathy. So it's the ability to feel what the other person is going through, even though we haven't been through it, but it's the ability to be able to do that. And we'll talk more about that later. Yeah. And the last one is the ability to connect on a deeper level. It's called social expertness, which is to connect with others at where they're at. As opposed to saying, well, I don't like them. But what would it take for us to connect with that person given that situation, because we don't know what they're going through. But to reach out and say, let's connect, that's the expertness that's required. So social expertness is all about the ability to not just connect, but to be able to maintain the connection over a period of time. So those are the 5 elements of emotional intelligence. And if we all practice those 5 elements, wow, we would...
The world would be a better place.
Yes. And we transform this planet.
Yeah, I can
So,
believe
yeah.
it. All right, well, I know you wanted to talk about and dig into the empathy concept a little bit more today. So let's start with that one as one of the 5 elements. And
Yeah.
how can we feel it more?
Great question, Shay. Really great question. Now, everybody would say that they're empathetic. So remember, sympathy and empathy are 2 different things. So let me just quickly explain. Sympathy is where you feel a sense of, oh, I feel sorry for you.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of a, yeah, you're going through that. So
You've
sorry.
divorced yourself from the situation. God.
Right.
Yeah.
But
My heart goes out to you. It's not going to stay with you forever, but that kind of thing.
Exactly. And, most people would feel some level of sympathy. Somebody lost a loved one and you go, oh, God, so sorry about that. But on the other hand, empathy is as if it's happening to you. And so sympathy is kind of rational in a way. It's just through the mind. But empathy has 3 specific components. And let me go from the very kind of the lightest to the deepest components. The first component, there are 3 components. The first one is what's called cognitive empathy. So cognition, as you would know, is all to do with the brain. So it's like when someone is going through a hard time, it's almost a sense of, yeah, I've been through that, and I understand what you're going through. So it's just an ability to say, yeah, okay, I understand. And most people leave it at that. They don't go any further. The second component, or the second way of looking at it, is to look at what's called emotional empathy.
Right.
Emotional empathy is where you actually feel what that person is going through. Literally feel the emotions of either loss or sadness or grief or whatever it is in that moment, where you are walking the emotional path with that person. And that is hard to do because oftentimes we think, they're either overreacting or they're, we might label it as something so that we can just dismiss it almost. But emotional empathy is the ability to feel the same emotion as the other person. And the third component, and this is where you really, really need to develop some emotional intelligence and the ability to really go deep within. And this is where you're an evolved person. And this is called compassionate empathy, where you don't just think the sadness, you don't just feel the emotion, but compassionate empathy moves you to do something about it.
Nice.
So it's all about taking action in the moment and say, it's not how can I help, but it's actually helping. Literally helping that person through that situation as they're going through it. So these are the 3 components of empathy. And, think of all the stress that we're all feeling being at home. And, a lot of people are saying, sometimes I just want to kill that person because they've been with them 24/7. But it's about those 3 components, what are they feeling? What can I do? And how can I help change that situation? So it's all about that emotional intelligence as well as empathy coming into play.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm going to ask you about the feeling component of that, because there are some people out there that are really not in a good way, and a lot, sadly, more than we care to admit, perhaps. And if you really go into feeling their feelings, can that not also be damaging for you as a person? Because if they're feeling, a lot of my clients, for example, are feeling depression, they might have just lost their job, they're struggling with their child, whatever it is. And they've sunk into, one of the most popular conditions I see is PTSD and stress in my clients. Now, if I go to feel what they're feeling, that doesn't necessarily help either of us. So how do you balance that?
Very, very good insight, Shay. It's obviously you will never get depressed to the level that they are.
Well, fingers crossed, I hope not.
So that's number one. But number two, it's the ability to feel the fact that they are going through that level of sadness or trauma in that moment, because it's far too easy to go, yeah, I know how you feel, as opposed to saying, wow, tell me about the depression, talk to me about it. Explain what it is that you can't control or feel that you're losing control over. So it's the ability to be able to draw that person out. Sometimes talking about it dissipates the emotion.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have that much power.
Yeah.
And because you're in a more elevated state, if I can put it that way, you're able to listen without judgment. And that's key, without labeling, without judgment, without putting them in a box, if you like. So they would feel listened to and they'd go, wow, Shay really understands me. Yeah. Shay really gets me, because she took the time to listen on an emotional level.
I think that's really key, actually. It's when I describe like the levels of listening, it's the difference between you talk to a man while he's watching his favorite football team play, he's gonna hear.
Right.
That ain't the type of listening we do.
No.
Whereas compared to, then there's the other levels of listening and you mentioned this about I went through this, oh, me too, this is what happened to me, and it's still not got that depth of just having your full presence and attention on that person, rather than in the back of your mind thinking, I forgot to feed my cat this morning, my child is crying,
Yes.
whatever it is.
Yes.
So how do you switch that off? Because some people have mastered that, that level of deep presence and that listening, and it is quite hard to do, when the computer game's calling or whatever it is, so how do you switch off those other things?
You hit a key word there, and that is presence. How often have you felt, wow, I did a lot of talking with that person and I don't know anything about them? Now, if you can get to that state where you have listened to such a point where you thought, wow, they didn't even ask me, you're getting to that really advanced state of what's called emotional empathy, because you have focused so fully and so in a present way with that person that nothing else mattered in that moment. The cat, the computer game, the email, the Facebook, the phone call, nothing else mattered except you were fully present. And they, sometimes when you're fully present, people think you're really weird.
Yes.
They go, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Why are you giving me your full attention? Normally you don't pay attention. So it's
football wasn't on, was it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how often have we been speaking to somebody and they're kind of half listening to you, but they're listening to another conversation at the same time?
A lot.
And they jump into that conversation, correct that person, and come back to you, kind of thing. So yeah, it's not something that you just learn overnight, because the brain requires some time to develop the skill. So it's like swimming. You're not going to develop a particular stroke, breaststroke, freestyle, whatever, backstroke, overnight. You have to practice.
Mm.
And it's the key. And the more irritated you are, the more progress you're making.
Good. Oh, yay.
So, so it means that your brain is actually working to be present, working to listen. And by the way, the more we listen to each other in that fully present way that you mentioned earlier,
Mm.
you are changing the other person. Just remember that.
Nice.
You are transforming them, which is pretty cool.
All right, I'm going to ask. I don't want to cast any assertions on my own art of listening, but we all have those moments where someone is talking and you find them very deeply irritating.
Right.
So how do you give your deep presence when that is how you're feeling about someone? And should we even be giving our deep presence to that?
So I like the word irritated. So there are two interesting things you raise. And the first question is, why is that person irritating you?
Mm.
In other words, it's not so much them, but there's something inside you that is causing the irritation. And initially you're going to say, oh, it's what they're talking about, it's their tone of voice, it's the way they look, it's the way they speak, it's a whole range of external things.
Way they hold their spoon. I know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a whole range of things. Now, that is what's called noise. It's the brain causing noise so that you don't have to focus on the key thing that's causing the irritation. So it fills your mind with all these external factors and says, that's the reason why I'm irritated. But you know what? Even if I played the recording of that person speaking to you, you'd still be irritated, even if the person is not there.
Mm.
So it's not the person, it's something deep within. And if you're willing to go on the journey, you are going to be an incredible individual, a leader, a manager, a friend, a partner. You're going to be incredible because suddenly you're able to control or self-regulate the irritation. So it's not the person, it's something inside you that's causing that irritation.
Mm.
The second thing is how do you switch that off?
Yeah.
And that's when you need to have that self-awareness that I talked about earlier, which is the ability to say, this irritates me, but how can I take my power back, be fully present, and be in control so that I don't give my power away to that irritation of that other person. So in other words, being there and saying, I can listen to you. Then you go, wow, that's what you mean. That's what you're saying. Can I just reflect back? So often irritation is because it's irritating us. But I would say turn it around and be a mirror and say, you know what? This is what you're saying. This is what you mean. If not, I think you need to come back and let's have this conversation another time because I've got an appointment in 5 minutes. So you've got to also break that person's train of thought so that they don't get stuck like a CD, as they say, doing the same circle over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes, those conversations can be a real gift because, that person might have never realized that they're coming across in that way.
Right.
But I'm big-headed enough to think that I'm always right. Some people might have found me irritating at times, whatever. But I think they're as difficult as it is, and I'm someone that also finds this difficult. Sometimes there's a real merit in just calling it, and maybe having those moments help you both grow rather than keeping it inside.
Exactly. And the interesting point is then you are self-aware and you're also self-regulating. In other words, you're self-aware that, wow, I'm getting irritated, and the ability to regulate the emotion, which is, let's call it for what it is. So you're taking both people to a higher level, if you like, in that moment. But the other side of the coin of all of this is that, the moment the person says, I'm okay, what's wrong with you? you immediately realize they've got no self-awareness. So why are you continuing this conversation anyway?
Mm-hmm.
So you could say, speak to the hand and they'll be happy.
Yeah, that's also true. So, how do you frame things? I mean, this is a real art, actually. But how do you frame things so that it's going to land in the best possible way to, get your message across?
I would take it into 3 components, and the very first thing I would say is, this is what I'm going to say
Mhm.
before I go into detail, so that person knows you're going to raise difficult issues, maybe. There might be deep issues, maybe. There might be confronting issues, maybe, but at least you prep them in the first 10 seconds.
Yeah.
So that's number one. At least that person then knows, okay, this is what I need to be prepared for. The second component, which then the brain will kick in, is it's either prepared to listen or it's not prepared to listen. And at that moment, you know what you need to do. You can't have that conversation. Not a good time. Or it's a good time to have the conversation. And so let's make this more comfortable for you and for me. Let's sit, let's talk, let's have a drink, let's do whatever it takes to have that conversation without the labels, the judgments, and that kind of thing. Now, if you're a smart person, you would say at the end of each of your points that you're wanting to make, you will go, how do you feel about that? So immediately you're taking control as opposed to waiting for the explosion to happen. So you're actually in control of the other person's emotion in a way. So then you can ask all sorts of questions before you move on to the other things that you need to talk about.
Good. Okay. Now, I know we were going to talk about intuition a little bit today as well. And once again, we've left it almost to the end. But now, how does that work?
Now,
why are some people more intuitive than others? Why can you sometimes tap into those moments where I feel that if I say this, that's how it's going to land, or I feel that this is how they're feeling about me? Why does that happen?
Yeah. Number one, just remember that intuition is always right. It's never wrong.
Okay.
So if you get it wrong, you weren't being intuitive.
How
Simple.
do you know the difference?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So how do you trust? How do you learn? How do you grow? And a really, really good person who did a lot of research into this tapped into intuition, and I'll put up the web link for you. And that is, intuition is all about trusting without doubting what the true essence of you is actually saying.
Okay.
So, in other words, you're not letting your mind get in the way of all this chatter that the mind develops all the time. Judgment, criticism, negativity, positivity, what if, what about, those are all questions. So what you need to understand is this, that the mind uses language to communicate, but the body uses emotions and feelings.
Okay.
And they can never lie to you, ever, ever lie to you. They can't lie, actually. So the more you develop the ability to listen to your body and your heart, you're developing the muscle, if you like, of intuition. And like any muscle, the more you use it, the more accurate, the more stronger, the more flexible it becomes. But the less you use it, you have to guess. Is it intuition or is it my mind?
I see.
Talking. And there are a number of components to that, which we're going to run out of time. But the key thing is that anytime you feel that you're 100% correct, trust it. but don't let the mind get in the way, because the moment it does, it will argue you into a position and you've lost your intuition. And you have to do it every day. You can't do it one day and not the next. So start to ask yourself, you have to be very, very calm, by the way, to trust your intuition. You can't be in a state of agitation, frustration, any of those negative states. You've got to be in a very calm state and trust what your heart and body are communicating to you via emotions and feelings. So if a word enters that particular bubble, it's not intuition.
I've got that. All right, we've got some loads of questions I could ask around that too. I'm going to go with this one. There's a concept of kinesiology, muscle testing. So when you were talking about, really trusting your body and the body knows the answer, the concept, which I know will literally ask your body the answer. So for those that don't know, for example, there's the body pendulum technique. So if you stand up straight, and you say a true statement, your body, most people, go slightly forward, and if it's a false statement, your body will go slightly back. So when I do this with people, I test it with their name or something like that. So the question is around, why do you literally always get an answer even if the question is something that you don't believe in? So for example, you could ask yourself a question about past lives, and you might think, well, you might be an atheist and think we're only, here, and yet your body will give you an answer. So I'm wondering how that all works and why your body will give you an answer.
Yeah. Oh, that's a complex question.
Sorry. I just thought of it and I thought, well, who better to ask?
This is the kind of question where you put away your watch and bring out your calendar to answer it.
It's okay, go for it.
So, and actually it's a very, very good question. So what you're tapping into is what's called the holistic energetic model of the body. So in other words, words resonate at a certain level. So every single word in our language resonates at a certain level. So great words like love, for example, forgiveness, joy, resonate at a much higher level than, say, guilt, anger, shame, which are lower resonating kind of words. So what the body is doing is tapping into the energy of the thing that is you're asking about. And the body, as I said earlier, cannot lie. So it can only give you the truth. So for example, your name is Shay, but suddenly if I called you Andrew, your body will go, what?
Yeah.
And as you said, it will not be able to stand its ground. It will actually give way. But the moment I call you Shay again, suddenly, it's very strong. Its identity is so secure. So what you're asking is, how do we tap into that? And every time you want to test something, for example, you might have done this. So certain music, which is really, really good for you to listen to, and there is other music that is totally abhorrent to your body. In other words, it just cannot stand it. And you know it because you'll just close your ears. So the body knows before the mind does. And therefore, that's why the energetic wholeness of the body is what gives you your certainty. And the more you're self-aware of the body, the more likely that you will be accurate in every decision that you make. And you will not have to justify the decision, you just know.
All right, slightly different, maybe less complex question is, one of the techniques of like really tuning into the wisdom of the body is also, you often hear, breathe into your heart, breathe into your heart knows the answer. Can you explain why that often works? Why is it are you actually breathing into your heart, or what's going on in the body there?
Yeah, because the heart is 6 to 10 seconds ahead of the mind. So in terms of that communication, it's actually like we're talking days ahead of the brain.
Mm.
Um, and because of that gap, in other words, that 6 to 10 second gap before the mind kicks in and then starts to judge and evaluate something, the heart knows whether something is right, good, accurate, best for you. And so what you're doing when you're breathing into it is basically this. You are trying to get the mind out of the way so that you can still the chatter of the mind enough to be able to get in touch with the heart. So if I slow down your breathing, your thoughts actually slow down. If I can get you to breathe slow enough, eventually your mind will also be still. And then you can listen to your heart. So one of the good things to try is to say, can I hear the beating of my heart?
Nice.
So remember how still you need to be to get to that level of stillness, and you can hear the heart actually communicating to you, with you. Whatever the question, issue, the decision that you might have to make. It's very clear.
Well, what if that clarity is scary? Or is it possible for that clarity ever to be scary? Because your heart
No,
could tell you so. It's not. Okay.
no, because the both the mind and the heart and the body love clarity. They don't like confusion. They don't like any kind of label or judgment. They just want to know, tell me the truth, tell me what it is. And that's what we value in every relationship, in every diagnosis, and every outcome. We just want it to be clear. So, for example, take what's happening with COVID right now. Look at the confusion that people are experiencing when it should be a very simple, here are 5 steps that we need to take. But we can't communicate that so easily because there is confusion. And we just want clarity. And by the way, if the clarity is so painful that you cannot face what the consequence might be, or the outcome might be, or the end result might be, then your mind will kick in automatically. It will just say, oh, don't worry about it, or it will ignore it, or it will justify it. So you don't have to worry about it. But to have that clarity in the first place is gold.
Yeah. Oh, well, I thought of an example of a film, but I think I might ruin the film for anyone that wants to watch it.
No, say it. That's good. Yeah.
It's a film called Memento. Or Momentum, I can't remember. It's an old one. It's shot in a very kind of artistic way because the story is out of sequence. And this is the plot ruiner. So if you're going to watch it, listen away now. But the man has only got a short-term memory, and his mission in life with this short-term memory is he wants to find out who killed his wife. So he tattoos all the clues all over his body. So that's now at the end of the film, it turns out he killed his wife. So, and not through any, he gave her an overdose of insulin. So that's what happens in the film. So, you know, that's what I mean by that moment of clarity for him was very frightening. And he didn't want the truth, you know. And to take it to some real life example, you know, your clarity could be, I need to walk away from my marriage, or I need to walk away from my job. You know, that's very big stuff. So I guess from what you're saying is in that moment of clarity, I suppose there's no fear in that actual clarity. But what if the consequences of that clarity are so big that they're scary? Is there anything that we can do to help us so that we're not ignoring and going back onto, you know, the hamster wheel?
Yeah. And in fact, I mean, those are the 3 biggest things that you could face in your life. Those 3 things that you just mentioned. You couldn't get bigger than that. But the interesting thing is, are you happy in those specific situations? Because all of those situations are not days or months, they're years of investment. And if you're willing to perpetuate the sadness for yourself and others, then by all means stay. But if the clarity is so powerful that you're releasing yourself and the others to be their best selves, their highest selves, the glorious outcome both for you and for them, then you have to know that you will never, ever be disappointed if your decision is based on clarity. Ever.
I love it. Okay. Well, on that beautiful note, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
I think one of the exciting things about this journey of life is that we all have the most beautiful, beautiful moment of truth, if you like, every day, and that is to make different choices rather than giving into the same old choices that we've always made. So whatever pattern that you're stuck in, whatever habit that keeps controlling you, I would say do it differently tomorrow. Break the pattern, break the habit, shift the thinking so that the things that we talked about today, which is emotional intelligence and the components of empathy, come into play on a much, much bigger level.
Wonderful. Again, I'll invite you to share your contact details. If our beautiful audience would like to get in touch with you, where can they do that?
Send me an email on complexchange@gmail.com.
Beautiful. David, thank you once again so much for coming on Inspired Online. We love you. Love to Sydney as well.
Thank you.
And
Thank you so much, Shay.
thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And hope to see you in person again very soon.
Indeed.